I give a brief shout out to my mom and my aunt who are in the audience. Hey, all
Perfect.
right.
Yes. So this is another way of connecting families across continents. So thank you for joining us. Willkommen here. So Andy has been the research lead for CNFs since many, many years. It's wonderful to work together. It's very much a symbiosis. And all of us, again, have our superpowers, and we couldn't do it alone. I think it's really a merging of different intelligences. His research is in virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and extended reality. And I think you will get to see some of this later on also. He has a TEDx talk entitled Living and Learning in the Metaverse. We all thought the metaverse would take off and we would actually sit here with 3D glasses. That was actually one idea we had for the third decade of the exhibit. We would just bring it into VR, and this way we all could meet there and explore new visualizations together, but it didn't go this way.
Yeah, it's when if you watch the TEDx talk, you'll notice that I'm very cautious about the metaverse. The whole concept was very ambitious, I think, and the talk itself focused more on what can VR really do, how can it be really useful. So I'm actually kind of glad we're not all sitting here with VR headsets on.
And VR is totally useful because you can see how a protein docks with some other chemicals, be it a drug or something else. You can see a new car, and you can maybe even pretend to drive the new car before it's built. You can do many, many things that would otherwise be impossible to do. So I think there's absolutely value arguments there. And we are using it in many cases for just visualizing social media data, but also visualizing the human body across scales. And I think there's maybe more information on this later on. All right. So Andy, in the interest of time, I will just give it over to you, but I will forward the slides.
Yes, if you could go to the next slide, please. So I want to give a brief outline of this hour that Katy and I have prepared. I'm going to demonstrate a series of sculptures here in Ladi Hall, where I am right now. The first one is Amatria, which many of you might have no idea what this is, but you will see for yourself. And then I'm going to show you Tavola, which is a visualization, a 3D visualization of some of the data and the structure of Amatria. And then finally, I'm going to show you dendrites and moss, which is another really beautiful form of interactive sculpture. So a couple of housekeeping things first. This talk covers intelligent sculptures that are not made by us, but by our friend and collaborator Philip Beasley out of Toronto, Canada. Our work, of course, centers on visualizing data from these sculptures, for example, with Tavola. And this is pretty old research at this point. I did this while I was still in my PhD, but it was just very fun digging back into the archives. So this hour includes, the plan at least is to do 2 live tours. So I have actually my phone mounted to this gimbal here. I'm going to take you out into Ladi Hall and show you Amatria as well as a series of dendrites and moths. I'm going to switch my phone to these. Thanks in advance for your patience. There might be a bit of friction switching between those two. And then I have a backup video of Tavola. Tavola is an old application, a couple of years old, and sometimes it just freezes. And so just in case, I found an old documentation video that documents what Tavola does. Okay, next slide, please. So this is how it felt going through all of the archives of basically my whole PhD, picking out all of these photos and images and documentation materials. But it was really fun. And it showed the value of just documenting software because it might not run anymore properly after, 4 or 5 years, but you will always have the video. So that was a really, really good thing to have. Okay, next slide, please. With that, I want to talk about Amatria. And instead of just showing slides, I'm actually going to take you out there. So I'm going to join the Zoom call with my phone. And then let's just hope that all of this just works out frictionlessly. Here we go. Cool. So let me take you with me here. This is novel. All right, so we're leaving my office now.
And it's small. I wonder if you can turn it so that we see a landscape. Is this an option? Maybe it can't.
Yes, no, I should. Here we go.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Now we see
All
it.
right. So now we're actually walking through our offices. So you have to imagine every morning when I come to work to my beautiful office, I get to see this. So I'm gonna exit out of here,
And
out
every
into the
time you
atrium.
go get coffee also.
Yeah, which is way too often every day. So now let me switch the camera, front-facing one. Here we go. So this here is, yeah, as you can see, Amatria is a smart sculpture, meaning that it has an architectural scaffold that is static, actually pretty thickly anchored into the structure of Bloody Hall. But then it has a series of electronics underneath her that are reactive to human input. So let's talk about the structure of the sculpture first. So here on the left side is the so-called big sphere. On the right side is the so-called small sphere. And then we have the so-called canopy, which evokes a feeling of walking in a dense rainforest, as it was described. And then over here, let's see, this is the so-called Sargasso veil. And the Sargasso veil has no electronics in it. It's just there for decoration and because it looks really beautiful. And so switching back over here, one thing you will see in the sculpture are these so-called sound sensor scouts. So this is an assembly of a speaker and 3 infrared sensors, as well as a microphone down here as well. And the sculpture is sleeping right now. She's in hibernation mode, so she doesn't currently run. But these infrared sensors are able to sense the presence of foreign objects and then allows the sculpture to react to human input. The large and small sphere over here have a variety of different sensors and actuators built into them. They have vibration motors, which gives them a feeling of basically like being in a rustling forest, and also lights. And if you can see the lights, recently we had really bad weather here during the day, and so it was pretty dark, and that actually allowed the sculpture to shine quite a bit. Right now we have a lot of light from the outside because it's snowing, and so we can quite appreciate the lights as much. Now, this is the sculpture herself, and now let's actually look at what's under the sculpture. So this is actually open to the public, so you can come by anytime and try this out yourself. This is the so-called Tavola application. So this is a full HD touchscreen. Again, this hardware is a couple of years old. And what you can see here is a touchscreen 3D application that shows you the sculpture herself. So what you see here in blue is the other static pieces of the sculpture that are not electrified. Then if I zoom out here, you can see that the pieces are actually labeled. So over here, we can see the canopy. It's also called the spar field, with all of the many lights and all of the many sensors. And then over here, we see the big sphere right here, and we see the small sphere over here. And you can see there's a variety of different colored cubes in here. So these yellow cubes are lights, and then we have speakers, and then we have vibration motors. And then we also have infrared sensors and microphones. So you can see these spheres here, those are the sensors, and those are only present in the area where humans can actually walk, which of course makes sense, because that is where you would actually want to perceive humans. You can also see that this is embedded into a 3D model of Bloody Hall, even though it's very sparsely lit. You can actually see these are the stairs. So if you look down here, there's a staircase. And then you can see the staircase in here as well. All right, that is a abbreviated tour of Amatria. I'm gonna switch back. I'm gonna go back to my office. I'm kind of curious who in the audience has visited Amatria in person before. Maybe some of you already have. Maybe some of you haven't. Maybe some of you have never been to Bloody Hall. All right, give me one sec.
I think Andy will show this. Amatria actually was created by a lot of different hands. So there were many volunteers from the Bloomington and the a larger IU community which came to Luddy Hall, and they were sitting together in a room, and just like people were mending socks in former times, here now they were laser cutting, they were 3D printing, they were assembling it all using many instructions from the Philip Beasley team. And it was just marvelous. It was around the Christmas time, and then going into April time, and just a wonderful community effort to build it. All right, I will switch back to the slides,
Sounds
and
good.
I can share the slides when you want me to.
Yeah, if you could go back to the slides,
All
that would
right,
be great.
so we go over to the slide with Amatria herself, and we have been discussing if we should change her gender from time to time, if we should change her name from time to time. It's all open for discussion.
Yeah.
All right, demo, thank you. And now details.
Yeah. So, usually I give these tours a couple of times a year. And one of the things I always like to bring out, because I'm so fascinated by it, are these schematic drawings. These are by themselves kind of a work of art. So here you can see all of the electronics inside of the sculpture and how they fit together. So a couple of things on the bottom left, you will see an area called control closet. This is an area adjacent to Amatria where you will find a series of laptops that actually control the behavior of the sculpture. It runs a behavioral engine written in processing.js. I assume many of you will be familiar with it. And in there is also a monitor that links to a webcam that allows the team to remotely supervise the sculpture as needed. Now, another thing you will see here is there's a different electronic districts, and it's a gigantic network. And the leaf nodes of this network, or actually it's kind of like a tree. So the leaf nodes of this network are all of the different sensors and actuators. So infrared sensors to detect the presence of foreign objects, and microphones to detect sound. And these are always bundled together. So if you look, for example, on the right side, kind of in the middle, you will see that there are things, they look a bit like insects. Those are I assume that those are moths, so those are little vibration sensors, vibration motors. And they are always bundled up in groups, and then they're being controlled by a device module, and they themselves are controlled by 13, I believe, Raspberry Pis across the sculpture. And these Raspberry Pis communicate via cable with the control closet. So it's a huge, gigantic piece of cables that is bundled and very elegantly hidden throughout the sculpture that goes into the control closet. And so the schematic just puts all of that together in a really visually stunning form. Definitely different from any other schematics I would have seen before. Next slide, please. And so one of the really cool things that the team did when they built this was they brought all of these architectural plans and left them with us for tours. And so this here is a bird's eye view of the sculpture, specifically of the spar field or the canopy. So you can see here the very dense area where the users or where the visitors typically walk through. Kind of feels like being in a densely populated rainforest. And you can see there are certain areas here that are marked red. Those, I believe, are sound sensor scouts, so these very dense assemblies of lights and microphones. Okay, next slide, please. And one of the other really gorgeous things that I rediscovered while going through the archives was just how many hand drawings there are in this. So most of these drawings, of course, have been made with software like CAD software or Rhino or the like. But in many of these instances, the designers actually did hand drawings, and it's just really gorgeous how these hand drawings integrate with these existing very precise architectural drawings. Okay, next slide. This is another view of the sculpture that I always like to show because it really shows nicely the topology of the sculpture. So you can see it always reminds me of kind of an alien planet with two suns, where two suns are rising simultaneously, a big one and a small one. So I don't know if this was on purpose when it was designed, but there are certain vantage points on the sculpture. And again, I look at the sculpture dozens of times a day, where it looks different every time depending on the light of the day and which side you look at. And that doesn't even take into consideration any of the electronics. It's just purely the scaffolding and the fixed part. All right, next slide. And so, in going through the archives, I there was a time when the sculpture did not exist yet. And so, this is a view of what Ladi Hall looks like today. Like, not right now. This is obviously in the summer. If you go one slide further, you'll see what it looked like in April of 2016 when it was still being built, or 2017, one of the two. So on the left side is this is the northeast corner of the building. This is the central atrium, and where Katy's pointing right now. This is where Amatria is today. Of course, Amatria wasn't there yet, but on one of Philip's the architect's site visits, we actually went up to the fourth floor while it was still being built. We had to put on, yellow jackets and helmets. And then you can see what the atrium of Bloody Hall looked like back then. So this is the big staircase. And then one slide further, please. And then if you look in the background, this is what the fourth floor used to look like. So it was all still one floor. They hadn't removed the kind of the hollowing out in the middle yet for the atrium. The focus rooms were not in there yet. You can see they're just kind of skeletons. And in the background, that is where Amatria would be later built. And it is kind of crazy that this is where we go to work every day, and this is what it used to look like. It was very hard to imagine back then what this building would eventually look like. Okay, one slide forward.
It's
And
great that
then,
you found all those. It's so cool.
yeah, I had a lot of fun taking those back then. So then fast forward 2 years or 1 year, Amatria, so Ladi Hall is open. We all have our offices here. We work on our dissertations and our papers, and Amatria is being built. So the Toronto team joined us for about 4 weeks, and of course, one of the things that was needed was volunteer work because it meant assembling hundreds, I mean, or millions of pieces. And Kadi, you were actually there. I mean, you probably did. So I did a lot of programming in those days for Tavola, but you were actually on the ground fiddling around with pieces. So can you talk a little bit about what I was like?
Absolutely. So there were emails going out to the Bloomington community, but also emails going out to just people in Luddy Hall. And people came and they had a lot of fun actually learning about how Amatria is built. So there are many different types of manufacturing going on. There is thermoforming of these spars here. So these are laser cut elements which you then put in a toaster oven and then extrude. Then you had all these flasks, these bottle-like elements here, which had to be filled with liquids and then corked up and then connected because they are actually batteries, which also help with the behavior of the sculpture. And then, of course, there are all these feathers, which you also saw in the demo that Andy just gave. And those had to be taken out of the mylar and put into their normal position. What you see here in the middle is a very beautiful piece of Amatria that hangs right over the staircase. And again, these flasks had to also be filled this time with blue liquid. And so you had to mix all of this up and fill it in and again close it up so that it doesn't evaporate. And in addition to all of this, there are loudspeakers which are 3D printed. So they had to be extracted out of their supporting sculptures and structures. And so there were many, many tasks that could be easily explained, but it really took 200 volunteers over many weeks to build this all. And of course, the artist's ambition, here is Philip Beasley, is always larger than what time and money can do. And so at the end, maybe half of the structure that was originally envisioned, or maybe two-thirds got built, but there were many things which just couldn't get done in the time we had. But it's still what was performed and ultimately implemented is just beautiful. And there was a humongous opening ceremony. I don't know, Andy, if you have any footage from that.
So yeah,
Very dramatic.
we have on the next slide actually is about a 2 to 3 minute video that we made at the time to document the building of Amatria. So maybe we can just play that.
Yeah.
And I
Can
don't hear.
you hear, can you hear the audio?
No, you might have to share with sound.
Yes, I will do that.
So I can briefly talk about this video while Kati is bringing it up. This is a 2 to 3 minute video that we took over about 4 weeks of just documenting while the team was here, doing interviews, being in the what we call the Wunderkammer, so the room where all of this was being assembled, put together, which is a teaching lab. Actually, we can actually see it in the thumbnail here, and I'm going to let the video speak for itself.
Yeah, or burst chamber, one of the two.
Any story like this starts with pain. Shared pain, because suffering is soul-making. And perhaps the slight glint of friendship that is starting to emerge because we're starting to know each other and spend time together.
It's pretty awesome. You know, I was walking under and I was like, I was just like, don't follow me, but it's pretty nice so far.
Biggest challenge for me in this project so far? I don't know. It's all a challenge.
Keeping up with the number of small components, gathering volunteers.
Like there are electronics and chemistries and metabolism and the scaffolding structure.
Are you taking video right now or just pictures?
Video.
Actually, we've been very successful with the sphere so far and having everything working perfectly first time, which is kind of rare.
What are you looking forward to the most at this point?
Besides sleeping, looking forward to seeing it all lit up and done. Seeing some of the local and neighbor behaviors that we've been talking about for so long. Looking forward to seeing it come alive.
I'm kind of stuck in here, so.
We are taking thingies of thingies.
The success with Amatria is when the lights go down and the sculpture is lit and it comes to life. Watching people's reactions, that's for me the biggest thing. And to have it here and to know that it's going to be here continuously, exposed to all of these students and inspiring them and inspiring us to ask bigger questions. That's probably my biggest success with Amatria.
So glad you did that one. Oh my God.
That was fun. That was fun. You will notice that we interviewed almost every team member from Philip Beasley's team, except Philip himself, because he was almost impossible to get. The only soundbite I got of him was at that party that Katy hosted where he talked about, that opening bit. It was, very, very stressful time, but it was all worth it. So every year since then, we celebrate Amatria's birthday. This is the first birthday with some delicious cake. You can see just a slide that with some photos from that year, which is always pretty well visited. It's also very, it's very public, like it's up here on the fourth floor of Luddy Hall. Then if you go to the next slide, I collected some slides with prior events that featured Amatria prominently. This was an Internet of Things, Wearable in Motions, kind of fashion symposium back in 2019. You will see here Philip Beasley on the top left, and then this is Laurie Burns-McRobbie, the former First Lady of IU, together with an assortment of deans from IU as well that Katy was able to invite. If you go to the next slide. In 2020, of course, COVID hit. And so during this year, the party was relegated to Zoom. And then if you go to the next slide, it was the same in 2021, except Peter, one of our colleagues here, and a musician, he actually had gone under Amatria and written a song for her, so that was very, very impressive. We had a few instances where people created art after being inspired by the sculpture. There was also one alive reading of a poem that a student had written. So it was a very, very interesting art that came out of this. And if you go to the next one, the fourth birthday, that one started to feature live performances. This one was a kind of circus performance, but because there was a lot of space needed for the artist here to roll around, we had to go down to the lobby. But of course, there was delicious cake again. And then if you go forward one slide, 2024, we had another dance performance directly under Amatria. This is just an amazing. I completely forgotten that this picture existed. Really great work, whoever took it. And then next slide. Now, what you see here is, of course, Amatria is a very, very, very popular destination for group photos. Typically, at the end of May, when high school prom season is, you will see busloads of high school students taking photos under her, of course, graduation photos. In this case, just some members of our lab here, including Mike here, who was one of the people helping to build Amatria, who ended up coming here for his master's degree afterwards. So she's just an amazing background. And this one we just took last week, like literally on Wednesday, a little team photo here from CNS. So Amatria, just the gift that keeps on giving. And then one more thing I want to highlight in terms of photos under Amatria. In 2019, I got a phone call. Hey, we got the Indiana governor visit today. Can you give a tour? And it's like, sure. So Eric Holcomb, governor at the time, and then IU president Mike McRobbie were there, and I was showing them some the same schematics I was showing you earlier. And then if you go forward one slide, just explaining the sculpture to the governor and his entourage. So it was a very fun thing to do. Okay, one more slide. So I want to briefly now talk a bit more about what we actually did to visualize. Now, the sculpture by itself is already a piece of art. It's already drawing so much attention, so much interest. But why is it in Luddy Hall? So one of the draws I've always seen in Amatria is that, of course, it's an art piece, but there's an engineering layer to it, and there's a data layer to it. All of the humans walking under it, speaking next to it, generate data input for Amatria. And so with Tavola, we tried to make the sculpture as a whole, at least the structure of it, a bit more understandable. So as you saw earlier, Tavola is a 3D application. It's deployed to a big touchscreen that features a simplified 3D model of the entire sculpture with the electronics highlighted with colors. So if you look here in blue, those are all of the fixed pieces of the sculpture, such as the spheres and the canopy. And then in colors, so here in yellow, those are lights. There's 250 lights in total, I think, across the entire sculpture, which makes it light up beautifully when it's dark. There are also an equal amount of vibration motors in it that give it like this rustling, soft feeling. That's everything that's those red kind of cubes in the background. And then there's sensors. So all of these little spheres that we see at the bottom, those are infrared sensors that sense when humans walk by. So if you go to the next slide, when digging into the archive, I found this ancient proposal from 2017 where we tried to think through, well, how are we going to visualize all of this? And so what you see here on the right side is the only piece, the only quote-unquote child of Amatria we had access to at the time, which was a dendrite. We're going to talk about dendrites in a second. Dendrites are miniaturized sculptures. They have exactly one sensor and exactly one actuator, whereas Amatria has hundreds of both. But this was the only kind of hardware we had accessible at the time. And so we're thinking, how can we visualize the data that goes in and out of the sculpture? Then if you go to the next one. And so then a year later, we got Amatria. And then in 2019, we had a big symposium in Toronto. It was one of our many trips to Toronto to the symposium of the Living Architecture Systems group. That's the kind of group that we became part of. It's a large group of artists and academics that study living architectures, of which Amatria is a prominent example. This was held at OCAD University here in downtown Toronto. If you go to the next slide, we gave a keynote about envisioning the Internet of Things that centered around Tavola and its capacity to visualize sensor data from a large built environment such as Amatria. And then you can skip over the next slide. That's just a bigger version of the thing we had before. It also featured a second scene that is offline right now because it relies on live data. But this is a hone in on Sound Sensor Scout number 2, which is the one that I was standing under. And what you can see here are three blue lights. And then in the middle, you see infrared sensors. And so what this would do was when you actually got close to the physical sensor, the particles that came out of this was animated would just become red and the cone would get really wide. And so it would kind of visualize the sculpture's excitement. And this was a proof of concept to see, can we tap into a live stream of data coming out of the sculpture? If you go to the next slide, you're going to see another screenshot, this time from early in the development, that was visualizing two infrared sensor streams, so the one on the right and the one on the left. So in this case, the user is playing with the one on the right and leaving the one on the left alone. And all of this, of course, was again, a real-time stream. So we depended on the team to make that stream available to us. If you go to the next one, this is a very short video that shows how this was encoded. So we had this hand that would go up and down depending on how excited the sculpture got at any moment in time. But of course, there was always a time delay there between the user performing the action, the sculpture getting the input being processed, and then the values being read out. This is just a backup video. We don't have to watch the whole thing.
Thanks, everybody.
It's again where it's so important to document software in case it doesn't run anymore. Today, luckily, it was also running. This is another figure that I found from another paper that we wrote at the time that explains the general setup of Amatria and how Tavola taps into it. So on the right side, you see what this live data stream actually looks like. So you can see here, this is a trigger message for Sound Sensor Scout number 2, which is the one that we are visualizing. And then it lists the 3 infrared sensor values. It goes from 0 to 1024. So you can see there is an excitement happening right now on this very channel. And so, of course, for us as data visualization specialists, having actual data we can visualize in such a clean way is really, really valuable. And then tying that back to 3D models, that was the whole draw of this entire exercise. And if you go to the one slide after that, we tried to tie this back into our data visualization literacy framework, where we have the different graphic symbols on the x-axis here, like the columns, and then the rows are the different graphic variables that explains how the visualization is actually being constructed based on best data visualization practices. If you go forward one more slide. This is from a demo I gave in Dresden in 2018 at the Technical University. We got invited there. And then this was kind of spontaneous. This was actually a live demo. So what you see here is the live application running. And we were actually working with somebody here, I think it was our colleague Liesel, who was actually triggering these infrared sensors at that very moment. And so while she was doing this here in Bloomington, Indiana, we got this a couple of seconds later in Dresden, Germany. So that was just, I think that's why I'm smiling here. I thought about why was I smiling so much here? And it just came back to me. It was because it was actually working over the continent. If you go further, a lot of the visualizations we built for the sculpture at the time were rudimentary because we wanted to build something useful for Amatria as engineers. So what you see here is a series of dot graphs. So on the x-axis of all of these is time, and on the y-axis are the infrared sensor values. And what you will see here is that we gave different colors to each of the sound sensor scouts. And the different infrared sensors on them. And what you will see here at the bottom one is that we had one particular one particular infrared sensor on each sound sensor scout that was always acting up, like it was always reading out values that were way too high, even though nobody was actually producing any movement there. So there was some noise that was generated that we weren't aware until we actually saw the visualizations, which is of course one of the foremost usages of visualizations. And then if you go to the next slide, this is another early visualization that we built for them. Again, really with a focus on building something useful to debug the sculpture. And what you can see here on the x-axis are the different sound sensor scouts, so 1 through 6. With 3 infrared sensors for each of them. And you can see the first infrared sensor for all 6 of these is always really high because it has a consistently high read value, which again was not really known to any of us until we looked at the visualizations. And so that was one of the really valuable things about visualizing this. Notice that, a lot of visualization is necessary to get the intelligence going. So Here we're not visualizing intelligence quite yet. We're visualizing all of the hardware that is needed to make the intelligence run. And so this shows another thing, I think, why humans will not become obsolete anytime soon, because somebody has to build the intelligence first and debug it and make sure it keeps running. If you go to the next slide, there's another image I pulled from way back in the archives. This was me. Katy, I assume you took this. Just having a big cup of coffee and trying to debug and build the sculpture. You can actually see that on my two monitors there. In the middle, you can see a tablet that I was using to implement all of the touch interactions. And I like to think, but it still runs, so I guess it turned out pretty okay. And then if you go to the next slide, I want to talk a bit more about visualizing intelligences beyond Amatria. This is so in 2018, in December, at around this time of the year, I went for, I think, the third or fourth trip to Toronto to Philip Beasley's workshop. So if you go back to over to the next slide. So for this workshop, Philip had assembled a series of people that were working with these architectures and trying to visualize them, hack them, build their own ones. So this is a demo that they had put together, and this is just a very poorly lit video of mine that shows you some of the scaffolding that they did in their studio. So they had just put together all of these different hardware assemblies and made them run in that way. Also with some sound. So this is just all of the workshop attendees kind of huddling together at night and listening to it. If you go to the next slide, this is during the day. You can see Mark, the project manager, here on the right. This was a new kind of light assembly that they had just developed and that they were demoing there internally for the first time. And so for me, I was the only, information data science person there. I was really focused on what kind of data can we get out of these sculptures and what kind of data can we send in. Most of the other folks there were, architects, sculptors. So I had kind of, that kind of angle to myself. If you go forward one more slide. At the end of the first day, I had built this thing where I had a slider here in my application. And when I moved it up, the sculpture would actually light up. And I could control the sculpture with just this little slider here. And so tapping into that architecture and getting that done after 10 hours, I was actually quite happy. I didn't expect to make progress that fast. Yeah, that was just, that was a very, very fun memory. Snowy winter in Canada. Okay, with that, I want to come to the last piece of this conversation, which is about dendrites and moss, which predate Amatria by about a year. This is a selfie I took of myself with a conference camera over in our teaching lab with a series of these. And I think instead of bringing the camera over there, I'm just going to bring them here. So give me 1 minute. I'm going to get those dendrites and moss in here.
All right. If there are questions in the meantime, I would be happy to answer them. We used to run summer camps using these dendrites and moths, and that was a lot of fun. Kids which typically are not so familiar with a screwdriver or with a zip tie, they now got to use all of this. It was a very hands-on experience. We had prefabricated many of the pieces, so the mylar feather that you see is laser cut. Then there is this extruded body, which basically goes into a toaster oven, and then you extrude it. And so the summer camp students, they got to build this all, and it was quite eye-opening for them that they can do this in a few days.
Yeah, so you just mentioned students. One of the really beautiful thing about these small scale sculptures is that they can be obtained and used as a kit. So you know exactly how many pieces you get. It's kind of like a Lego set. And then they do one thing, like they have one sensor and one actuator. And then of course you can chain them together if you want to. What you actually see here in this particular photo is an assembly of moss and dendrites all chained together. In this case, what I'm going to be showing you are individual ones that have, their own individual interactions. So this is a moth. A moth consists of what's called a frond. This is frosted mylar. It feels like paper, but it's incredibly sturdy. And then there is a vibration motor built in at the top here. And there's a button down here. So if I click this, see how it lights up. And you might even hear the vibration. Amatria has hundreds of these, and so you can imagine what that feels like when the sculpture is turned on. In this particular case, this one here is mounted with a battery case, but you can daisy chain them together with other moths and create behaviors that way using a programming language like Arduino. And then here, this fella, this is a so-called dendrite. I have to get some power here. Let's see. So a dendrite is a slightly more complex, simple sculpture with one sensor and one actuator. So I'm going to explain what it is. So this is an infrared sensor, and this is also a frond. But as you can see, there is a piece of fishing line here that pulls the frond down. And down here is a material, and I forget what the name is. But if you shoot current through it, it's going to contract. So what happens when you do that is it pulls down the frond and it gives it this kind of bowing motion, like this, like kind of like leaves rustling in the wind. And let me actually try and plug this into power real quick. Let's see. All right, so you might have just seen that it moved. So once the infrared sensor here is triggered beyond a certain threshold, it's going to shoot current through this cable here, which actually feels warm right now, and it's going to pull down the top of the front. And then there's about a 30-second cooldown phase. Now this one here, this one actually always actuates itself because you can see it triggers itself. And now you can see that the front is slowly moving back up as the cable here is cooling down again. And then in the second, when the cooldown is over, you're going to see it actuate again. So just give it a second. It's going to move again. There we go. And it does that by itself. It's like we oftentimes ascribe alive properties to inanimate objects if they do very simple things that appear to be happening on their own. So this is a very classic example. Like whenever I see this, I think, oh well, it's bowing, like it says hello, even though it's just a very simple physical reaction. But we are so fast at ascribing human properties to objects, and I think this is a really good example for that. Now, one of the beautiful things again is that you can chain this with a moth or with another dendrite or with 100 other dendrites. And this way you can build these very complex rustling movements and behaviors if you want. All right. So we spent a lot of time over the past few years, especially before we had Amatria, in building these with using them for outreach as well. So if you go to the next slide, Katy.
Yep. Give me a moment.
Yeah, so another thing that I got from the archives last night was there's a convention in Bloomington called Makevention, which brings together makers, crafters, builders, artists to showcase their work. And we've had a pretty strong presence there, just building moths and dendrites for a while. And so you can see just all of the different people that we were able to engage in that way. And of course, this was the perfect kind of target audience for this kind of work, especially before we actually had something like Amatria. Okay, next slide, please. And then finally, I want to cover one more thing. It is another sculpture. It is not Amatria. This sculpture was only in a museum for 6 months, and this was in 2017. This was the so-called sentient veil at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. And I was fortunate enough to join the team at the time on site while they were building it. And when we built the precursor to Tavola, which I will show you in a second. So if you go to the next slide, we wrote a paper about this, which we submitted to a conference called Future Technologies Conference in Vancouver, which I'll get back to in a second. This was a very positive writing experience. On the right side, you can see what Sentient Veil looks like. It was in many ways a slightly simplified version of Amatria. It was a curved veil that was suspended, at it basically subtended a 90-degree arc. And you can see here that it consisted of a variety of different LED lights as well as speakers. I think there were a total of 15 speakers in that thing. So if you go to the next slide, I brought my whole photo gear with me and to just document how beautiful this sculpture was. And of course, these sculptures are made to shine in the dark. And that was definitely true for Sentient Veils. You can already see many of the same elements that Amatria has. You can see all of the different lights. You can see the custom printed 3D speakers. You can also see the glass vials that have various fluids in them for color refractions. And you can see the extremely fine pieces that end and kind of almost look skeletal, but just hauntingly beautiful. And then if you go forward one more slide, what you can also see back there already are the amazing architectural drawings. This is a schematic drawing of Sentient Veil, which shows you really nicely where the different power and node device cables were pretty elegantly running through the sculpture. And of course, for us, when we were building the visualization tools and the 3D visualizations, having these schematics was extremely valuable for us to understand where the major electronics actually are inside of the sculpture. Again, forward one more slide. Here are some more figures from the papers on the right side. You can see these bottom two figures. Those are actual 3D screenshots from this application that we built to visualize sensor activity in Sentient Veil. We got this model from the team, like from the Beasley team. They were always very generous in sharing 3D models with us. And you can see here on the right side, as a user is walking or standing under Sentient Veil, this particular node array here is lighting up. And so again, building this kind of visualization for that, we really needed these schematics, and of course, plenty of testing like on site was needed as well. And so being at this museum, kind of like after hours, like working over this 14 hours a day was extremely rewarding and just a very, very positive experience and very fun. It was basically like our own little hackathon. And we're like everybody else is trying to put together the sculpture, putting everything in the right place, doing tests. And I was just sitting there coding, looking, updating. So it was just a very unique and powerful experience. Okay, and then finally, I did mention before that we submitted this to a conference in Vancouver, Canada, about 8 years ago now. And I actually brought a whole suitcase full of dendrites with me. And I had that set up for my talk just because I couldn't obviously bring Sentient Veil with me. So I brought a suitcase full of dendrites and moths with me. And the presentation went so well, they awarded me the best presentation award at the end, if you go back to the next slide. So yeah, it came completely as a surprise, but I was very happy about it. I'm glad I actually went through the trouble of packing all of this very delicate, small sculptural architecture into that suitcase. Okay, I want to close real quick by pointing you all. A lot of what I showed you today was built with video game engines. We have a panel tonight at 7 p.m. where we talk about video games and intelligence. We have some pretty nice guests with us. So if you're interested at all in video game development and intelligence, please consider joining there. Okay, looks like we have a few more minutes for Q&A and discussion.
Thank you, Andy, for walking us down memory lane. But of course, Amatria is in our building so that it attracts people which might otherwise not come over to engineering. So it has attracted many artists, many poets, many musicians. We had a yoga session held under Amatria, kind of in the spirit of the AI kind of hovering over you. What kind of yoga can you do there? And again, every year, we have a birthday party, so everybody is welcome to join. So if you happen to be in Bloomington, please do come join us in April. It's always around April 10. And at that birthday party, we also have a lot of creativity sparking and lots of presentations by people which otherwise would not meet and may also not come necessarily to engineering. And one piece that we have not been able to do over the last 8 years is to have a brain interface. So we got close because Philip Beasley's team had collaborations with a team in The Hague, I think, at the Technical University, or Delft, right? In Delft at the Technical University. So they had brain interfaces and we almost got it done. there, but I think that's really something that we would love to see. So have one or more human beings with brain reading devices connected to Amatria interacting this way. What else would you like to see for Amatria?
So one thing I've always liked is the idea of kind of an ambient visualization. So, let's say that it's snowing outside and you get into the building and then, the sculpture kind of takes in the mood of the weather outside. And, there's weather data available anywhere on the web. So the idea of like, the sculpture adjusts itself to the mood that is being set outside, or maybe the exact opposite mood. Maybe it's a rainstorm outside, and then the sculpture kind of gives us yellow light, or evoking like, the sun on a blue sky. So having these kinds of ambient visualizations that are, aware of what's happening on the outside world and kind of taking you in as you get up on that fourth floor. That's one of them. And then the other one I think is just, like a daily check-in. So let's say it's 8:30, I get here, I get my first coffee, and I walk onto the sculpture and I'm being taken in by it. Maybe the lights light up when I come around the corner, and then the lights follow me as I walk over to the other side, and I just know, hey, the sculpture is there, and it's aware, and it kind of goes with you, and as you make your way underneath it. So these are two things that are they're kind of transitory in that they happen for a couple of seconds, but you do them regularly. And I think this would really add to the value that this brings inside of the building.
Very good. Did you want to ask a question? I saw your hand up there for a moment.
I just wanted to point out that there are two questions in the Q&A if you would like to answer.
Do you want to read them to us all?
Yeah, sure. One of this is, are the moth kits currently available for purchase?
We can find a way to do that, yes.
And the other question is, has Amatria influenced any projects around the world to your knowledge?
Yeah, so those are both really good questions. I can also answer the second one. So Amatria is part of a family of sculptures. There are sculptures at TU Delft in the Netherlands. There are sculptures in Toronto, and they all share the same, architectural base ingredients. And of course, one of the outstanding features of Amatria that is different from the other ones are the spheres. And so from what I understand, the way that these spheres are constructed architecturally and how few attach points they need to the features of the building, that is a novelty. And so I think that this kind of architectural knowledge probably has made its way into other sculptures as well. I think it's impossible to look at a sculpture like this and not be inspired and not get ideas from it in various forms. I wouldn't be surprised if, an engineering student here, walked on this every day, and maybe now they're working at an animation company, for example, and certainly there's going to be some kind of inspiration that way as well. So I think there's many different ways in which the sculpture, just by its pure presence, has inspired people in their very own fields to think about things differently, or, as Rob, the lead engineer in the video said earlier, asking bigger questions. So I think the answer is yes.
And I would really love to reconnect with Marlot Meyer, which just presented in the previous hour, and just discuss what can be done together. So thanks to very generous private sponsoring, we now have resources each year to support class projects inside of engineering. So we have a big makerspace where there's always a lot of interactivity in terms of 3D printing and cutting and everything else. But we could then also have initial seed funding for these kind of new collaborations, especially if they can be made part of a classroom experience. And I would love to see this. And again, I think it would also just increase the opportunities we have to connect with the School of Arts, Architecture and Design, to connect over to the ballet department and the theater department. We had really great joint workshops on fashion technology, which is needed for sports rehabilitation. So if you have an injury during sport, how quickly do you get people back? And there are lots of custom devices now that you can use to basically heal faster. But then, of course, we also have a lot of fashion technology now to keep you healthy or to do things that you couldn't do without that technological enhancement. So I think engineering here at IU is really trying to connect and reach out to the arts and humanities. We are part of a humanities campus, and it's just recently that engineering came into existence here. And it's just wonderful that Amatrias is playing a major role and in making that happen, in providing a piece that's remarkable, that can be talked about, that can be photographed, that can serve as a meeting point and spot where you just can arrange for a meetup because it's pretty unique. There's no way to miss it. And ultimately to get inspired by Amatria and go beyond what exists so far.
Very well said. Thank you so much. I'm also very glad to having been able to show the sculpture, even if you might have never been in Luddy Hall, but now you have some idea of what this architecture here looks like and just how well it fits into the building as well.
Thank you, Andy. This was super. Thank you for getting us the demos also. That's always great.